Hello, this is Heavy D Storytelling, and I'm David Sneathen, and I'm going to read a story. Yesterday we read chapters 4, 5, and 6 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and no, I don't need you to get it ready. I need you to draw pictures. And today we are going to, since today is April the 12th, happy Resurrection Day, by the way. Since today is April the 12th, we're going to start with the 12th chapter of Proverbs. I do see that there's nobody on yet, so I will give you just a minute to see if anybody's going to first person. I don't have my phone with me, so I can't text you anything. I don't have a link to share. I guess maybe, I don't know if that works or not. So I'm just waiting. La 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 la. Okay. Well, we're 2 minutes after 7, and as you come along, you feel free to just start listening to the story. I'm going to start. This is Proverbs chapter 12 from the English Standard Version of the Scripture. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. A good man obtains favor from the Lord, but a man of evil devices he condemns. No one is established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous will never be moved. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who brings shame is like rottenness in his bones. The thoughts of the righteous are just. The counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright delivers them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. A man is condemned according to his good sense, but one of twisted mind is despised. Better to be lowly and have a servant than to play the great man and lack bread. Whoever is righteous has regard for the life of his beast, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Whoever is wicked covets the spoils of evildoers, but the root of the righteous bears fruit. An evil man is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous escapes from trouble. From the fruit of his mouth a man is satisfied with good, and the work of a man's hand comes back to him. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. The vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but those who plan peace have joy. Woe befalls the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. The righteous is a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. Whoever is slothful will not roast his game, but the diligent man will get precious wealth. In the path of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. That is Proverbs chapter 12 from the English Standard Translation of the Bible. Hello, Katie Otis. We are so glad that you joined us. Hello, Stephanie Moore. We're so glad that you joined us. We love to see new people. I hope that you enjoy the story that we have tonight. Again, we're reading The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. If you want to see the the previous chapters from this book and also the two previous books, Prince Caspian and The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, all you have to do is go over to the YouTube page where I have a playlist of all of my readings to my children that I've posted on YouTube. So, and that's the same YouTube page. It's called Heavy D Storytelling. So, and I'm Heavy D. My name is David Sneathen. And at this time, I'm going to send it over to Kimberly, who's going to give us a synopsis of where we are in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So here is Kimberly.
So, in the last few chapters, Caspian, who was sold as a slave to one of his father's friends, what happened was he went over and he was like automatically freed because his father's friend was like, "Oh, hey, you're Caspian, right?" Well, kind of, sort of like that. But anyway, he had a big parade and went over to the governor's house, and he made slaves illegal, and he made his father's friend a duke, and the governor is no longer a governor. And so a few days later, they went out to sea again, out of the lone islands and all of the charted land that the Narnians know of. And they
it was a nice calm voice.
They found an island, and if I'm right, two of the barrels of water broke during the storm, and
So they had to make some repairs.
yeah, later when they got on the island, and the mast broke or something. Yeah.
Okay, so they had to repair the ship.
And so
they were all busy working, and what happened?
So Eustace, Lucy and
Oh,
Edmund's
he's the
cousin.
splendid chap that came from England, right?
No, he's a very self-centered, very naughty guy.
Okay.
Like, imagine Edmund before, like, when he met the White Witch.
I'm interrupting. Katie Otis says, "Hey, Kimberly."
Hey, how are you?
Okay, here we go.
So,
Say hi to
so then what happened was, so Eustace, he decided, oh, hey, I'm going to go out and go hiking because I want to, and I don't want to be here with everybody right now because I'm mean and grumpy. So he goes on a hike and he goes down a hill. Well, actually, he goes up a hill first, and then he tries to go back down the hill when he doesn't find a nice spot, and he accidentally goes down the wrong way. And when
into the island.
Yeah, into the island. And when the storm cleared, because when the fog cleared, yeah, there was fog, he saw that he took the only safe route down this hillside, and the rest of it he probably would have died going down. And so then he sees this dragon, and he doesn't know it's a dragon because he doesn't read fairy tales. And for some reason, he never heard of a dragon. No. So, he sees this dragon, and it walks over to this pond. And so the dragon looks like it's about to drink from the pond, but just before it drinks from the pond, it up and dies. So Eustace, he goes into the dragon's cave to wait out the rain that had started recently, and so he sees all the golden treasure like dragons keep. You know how dragons keep a hoard of stuff? So he's like, oh man, look at this stuff. So he puts on a bracelet, and it was a very big bracelet, so he put it up high on his arm, right? So then what happens? He sees a dragon, and he's like, oh my gosh, the dragon had a mate. And then he moves his arm, and he sees that the dragon moved. He looks the other way and sees another big giant dragon claw. So after a few seconds, he sees smoke rising from just in front of his face. He holds his breath and the smoke stops. And he lets out his breath and the smoke goes on again. Now, of course, you would probably be guessing that he is the dragon, but he didn't know that. He didn't guess it. So, when he could not hold his nerve any longer, he up and bolted, and he thought both of the dragons were chasing him. So, when he got out and he went over to the pond and looked at his reflection and just moved a little bit, he saw that he turned into a dragon. And so then he flew around the island after eating the other dragon, because apparently dragons are cannibals. I don't know. But so he flies around and then he sees the Dawn Treader on the beach. So he goes over there. And everybody is panicking because they see a dragon. And they're like, should we fight it? And they're like, okay, morning. And when they get there, they see that the dragon, when they start talking to each other about like if the dragon was good or not, they start nodding, yes, I'm good. And then after like a little bit of back and forth, for Eustace couldn't talk anymore because he was a dragon. After a little bit of back and forth, they understand that he's at least hurt and that he's a nice dragon.
And Lucy uses the cordial and it makes his arm not hurt as bad.
Yeah,
Because
but
you missed the part that his arm
right,
was hurting.
right. His arm was hurting because of the bracelet. Because obviously his arm would have grown a great deal. Like imagine a dragon the size of me. That wouldn't be a big dragon, would it? Of course not. So Lucy, she uses her magic cordial to heal his arm, and it stops swelling as much, but it doesn't dissolve the gold and diamonds that the bracelet had. So and that's like almost exactly where we are.
That's about where we are. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to begin with chapter, what did we finish with? 6? That was the adventures of Eustace. And now the next chapter is called How the Adventure Ended, chapter 7. She used to remember what the first word was. But the first word is look. So without further whatever. By the way, Destiny Hall, hello. We're glad to have you. I hope you enjoy our story time tonight. All right. What? Yeah, okay. So, chapter 7, How the Adventure Ended. This is the adventure with Eustace that we just had in the last chapter. Look at what? Said Edmund. Look at the device on the gold, said Caspian. A little hammer with a diamond above it, like a star, said Drinian. Why, I've seen that before. Seen it, said Caspian. Why, of course you have. It is the sign of the great Narnian house. This is the Lord Octesian's arm ring. Villain, said Reepicheep to the dragon, have you devoured a Narnian lord? But the dragon shook his head violently. Or perhaps, said Lucy, this is the Lord Octesian, turned into a dragon under an enchantment, you know. It needn't be either, said Edmund. All dragons collect, but I think it's a safe guess that Octesian's got no further than this island. Are you the Lord Octesian? Said Lucy to the dragon, and then, when it sadly shook its head, are you someone enchanted, someone human, I mean? It nodded violently, and then someone said, people disputed afterward whether Lucy or Edmund said it first, you're not Eustace by any chance? And Eustace nodded his terrible dragon head and thumped his tail in the sea, and everyone skipped back, some of the sailors with ejaculations I will not put down in writing, to avoid the enormous and boiling tears which flowed from his eyes. Lucy tried hard to console him, and even screwed up her courage to kiss the scaly face, and nearly everyone said, hard luck, and several assured Eustace that they would all stand by him, and many said there was sure to be some way of disenchanting him, and they'd have him as right as rain in a day or two, and of course they were all very anxious to hear his story, but he couldn't speak. More than once in the days that followed he attempted to write it for them on the sand, but this never succeeded. In the first place, Eustace, never having read the right books, had no idea how to tell a story straight, and for another thing, the muscles and nerves of the dragon claws that he had to use had never learned to write and were not built for writing anyway. As a result, he never got nearly to the end before the tide came in and washed away all the writing except the bits he had already trodden on or accidentally swished out with his tail, and all that anyone had seen would be something like this. The dots are for the bits he smudged out. I went to sleep, gross dragon's cave 'cause it was dead, and any heart woke up and could get off him arm. Oh, bother! It was, however, clear to everyone that Eustace's character had been rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. He flew over the whole island and found that it was all mountainous and inhabited only by wild goats and droves of wild swine. Of these he brought back many carcasses as provisions for the ship. He was a very humane killer, too, for he could dispatch a beast with one blow of his tail so that it didn't know, and presumably still doesn't know, it had been killed. He ate a few himself, of course, but always alone, for now that he was a dragon, he liked his food raw, but he could never bear to let others see him at his messy meals. And one day, flying slowly and warily, but in great triumph, he bore back to camp a great tall pine tree which he had torn up by the roots in a distant valley and which could be made into a capital mast. And in the evening, if it turned chilly, as it sometimes did after the heavy rains, he was a comfort to everyone, for the whole party would come and sit with their backs against his hot sides and get well warmed and dried, and one puff of his fiery breath would light the most obstinate fire. Sometimes he would take a select party for a fly on his back so that they could see wheeling below them the green slopes, the rocky heights, the narrow pit-like valleys, and far out over the sea to the eastward a spot of darker blue on the blue horizon which might be land. The pleasure, quite new to him, of being liked, and still more of liking other people, was what kept Eustace from despair. For it was very dreary being a dragon. He shuddered whenever he caught sight of his own reflection, and he flew over a mountain lake. As he flew over a mountain lake, he hated the huge bat-like wings, the saw-edged ridge on his back, and the cruel curved claws. He was almost afraid to be alone with himself, and yet he was ashamed to be with the others. On the evenings, when he was not being used as a hot water bottle, he would slink away from the camp and lie curled up like a snake between the wood and the water. On such occasions, greatly to his surprise, Reepicheep was his most constant comforter. The noble mouse would creep away from the merry circle at the camp fire and sit down by the dragon's head, well to the windward to be out of the way of his smoky breath. There he would explain that what had happened to Eustace was a striking illustration of the turn of fortune's wheel, and that if he had Eustace at his own house in Narnia, it was really a hole, not a house, in the dragon's head, not let alone his body, would not have fitted in, he could show him more than 100 examples of emperors, kings, dukes, knights, poets, lovers, astronomers, philosophers, and magicians who had fallen from prosperity into the most distressing circumstances, and of whom many had recovered happily ever afterward. It did not, perhaps, seem so very comforting at the time, but it was kindly meant, and Eustace never forgot it. Here is a picture, by the way, of Eustace the dragon. You can see the Dawn Treader in the background here, and there's Reepicheep over there talking to him. So, and he's not a very happy dragon, as you can see. But of course, what hung over everyone like a cloud was the problem of what to do with their dragon when they were ready to sail. They tried not to talk of it when he was there, but he couldn't help overhearing things like, would he fit all along one side of the deck? And we'd have to shift all the stores to the other side down below so as to balance. Or would towing him be any good? Or would he be able to keep us by flying? keep up by flying, and most often of all, but how are we to feed him? And poor Eustace realized more and more that since the first day he came on board, he had been an unmitigated nuisance, and that he was now a greater nuisance still. And this ate into his mind just as that bracelet ate into his foreleg. You guys continue the conversation while I'm reading. That's great. I won't be able to be part of it though. I lost my place. Just a second. It's no problem. I will find it. I promise. Something about a foreleg. And poor, and this ate into his mind, just as the bracelet ate into his foreleg. He knew that it only made it worse to tear at it with his great teeth, but he couldn't help tearing now, and then especially on hot nights. About 6 days after they had landed on Dragon Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting gray so that you could see the tree trunks if they were between you and the bay, but not in the other direction. As he woke, he thought he heard something moving. So he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him, and presently he thought he saw a dark figure moving on the seaward side of the wood. The idea that at once occurred to his mind was, "Are we so sure there are no natives on this island after all?" Then he thought it was Caspian. Not the right size, but he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him and could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in its place and then rose to investigate. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He saw now that it was too small for Caspian and too big for Lucy. It did not run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger when the stranger said in a low voice, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" said he. "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund, "so it is, my dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and lurched as if he were going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, studying him. "What's up? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting, but at last he said, "It's been ghastly. You don't know, but it's all right now. Could we go and talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yes, rather. Anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go and sit on the rocks over there. I say, I am glad to see you looking yourself again. You must have had a pretty beastly time." They went to the rocks and sat down, looking out across the bay, while the sky got paler and paler, and the stars disappeared except for one very bright one low down and near the horizon. "I won't tell you how I became a dragon till I can tell the others and get it all over," said Eustace. "By the way, I didn't even know it was a dragon till I heard you all using the word when I turned up here the other morning. I want to tell you how I stopped being one." "Fire ahead," said Edmund. "Well, last night I was more miserable than ever, and that beastly arm ring was hurting like anything." Is that all right now?" Eustace laughed, a different laugh from any Edmund had ever heard him give before, and slipped the bracelet easily off his arm. "There it is," he said, "and anyone who likes it can have it as far as I'm concerned. Well, as I say, I was lying awake and wondering what on earth would become of me. And then, but mind you, it may have been all a dream, I don't know." "Go on," said Edmund with considerable patience. "Well, anyway, I looked up and saw the very last thing I expected. A huge lion coming slowly toward me, and one queer thing was that there was no more moonlight last night, but there was moonlight where the lion was, so it came nearer and nearer. I was terribly afraid of it. You may think that, being a dragon, I could have knocked any lion out easily enough, but it wasn't that kind of fear. I wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was just afraid of it, if you can understand. Well, it came close up to me and looked straight into my eyes, and I shut my eyes tight. But that wasn't any good because it told me to follow it." "You mean it spoke?" "I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't think it did, but it told me all the same. And I knew I'd have to do what it told me, so I got up and followed it. And it led me a long way into the mountains, and there was always this moonlight over and round the lion wherever we went. So at last we came to the top of a mountain I had never seen before, and on the top of this mountain there was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it, but it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought if I could get in there and bathe, it would ease the pain in my leg, but the lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said any words out loud or not. I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't any clothes on, when I suddenly thought that dragons are snaky sort of things and snakes can cast off their skins. Oh, of course, thought I, that's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself, and my scales became coming off all over the place. And then I scratched a little deeper, and instead of just scales coming off here and there, my whole skin started peeling off beautifully, like it does after an illness, or after as if I was a banana. In a minute or two, I just stepped out of it. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling, so I started to go down into the well for my bathe. But just as I was going to put my feet into the water, I looked down and saw that they were all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as they had been before. Oh, that's all right, said I. It only means that I had another smaller suit on underneath the first one, and I'll have to get out of it too. So I scratched and tore again, and this underskin peeled off beautifully, and out I stepped and left it lying beside the other one and went down to the well I bathe. Well, exactly the same thing happened again, and I thought to myself, oh dear, however many skins have I got to take off? For I was longing to bathe my legs, so I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, just like the two others, and stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew it had been no good. Then the lion said, but I don't know if it spoke, "You will have to let me undress you." I was afraid of its claws, but can I tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I just lay flat down on my back to let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep. Sorry, I'm sorry, I'll wait for you guys. Okay, we can wait. It's okay. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart, and when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked the scab off a sore place, it hurts like billy-o, but is such fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd no skin on, and threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm, and then I saw why. I turned into a boy again. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know they've no muscle and are pretty moldy compared with Caspian's, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you with his paws? Well, I don't exactly remember, but he did somehow or other, in new clothes, the same I've got on now, as a matter of fact, and then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are the clothes for one thing, and you have been, well, undragoned for another. What do you think it was, then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan, said Eustace. I've heard that name mentioned several times since we joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what, I hated it, but I was hating everything then, and by the way, I'd like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been pretty beastly. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only bad, but I was a traitor. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Eustace. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He is the great lion, the son of the emperor beyond the sea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often, and it may be Aslan's country we're sailing to. Neither said anything for a while. The last bright star had vanished, and though they could not see the sunrise because of the mountains on their right, they knew it was going on because the sky above them and the bay before them turned the color of roses. Then some bird of the parrot kind screamed in the wood behind them. They heard movements among the trees, and finally a blast on Caspian's horn. The camp was astir. Great was the rejoicing when Edmund and the restored Eustace walked into the breakfast circle round the campfire. And now, of course, everyone heard the earlier part of his story. People wondered whether the other dragon had killed Lord Octavian several years ago, or whether Octavian himself had been the old dragon. The jewels with which Eustace had crammed his pockets in the cave had disappeared along with the clothes he had been wearing, but no one, least of all Eustace himself, felt any desire to go back to that valley for more treasure. In a few days now, the Dawn Treader, remasted, repainted, and well stored, was ready to sail. Before they embarked, Caspian caused to become a smooth cliff facing the bay the words Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Octavian had his death. It would be nice and fairly true to say that from that time forth Eustace was a different boy. To be strictly accurate, he began to be a different boy. He had relapses. There were still plenty of days when he could be very tiresome, but most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. The Lord Octavian's arm ring had a curious fate. Eustace did not want it and offered it to Caspian, and Caspian offered it to Lucy. She did not care about having it. Very well, then. Catch as catch can, said Caspian, and flung it up in the air. This is when they were all standing looking at the inscription. Up went the ring, flashing in the sunlight, and caught and hung as neatly as a well-thrown quoit on a little projection on the rock. No one could climb up to get it from below, and no one could climb down to get it from above. And there, for all I know, it is hanging still, and may hang till the world ends, or till that world ends. Here's a picture of it hanging on the Okay, and that's the end of chapter 7. So I think our limit today is 2 chapters. Which one was that one? The last book in the series was just so sad. The last book is The Last Battle to Katie. If you're still listening, and the plan is that I'm going to read all of them. I gave them the option of reading them in the published order or in the new order, and this is the 3rd book in the original order. So that's the order that I'm reading them in right now, just to catch you up on the series. But you're welcome to listen in on all of it that we've been we've been reading, and I've posted them on YouTube, so you can look at them there. So chapter 8 is called 2 Narrow Escapes. So like I said, we've only got 2 chapters today because I've got work tonight from 0 to 6 in the morning, and yeah. So that's what that is. Okay, so chapter 8, 2 Narrow Escapes. Everyone was cheerful as the Dawn Treaders sailed from Dragon Island. They had fair winds as soon as they were out of the bay and came early next morning to the unknown land which some of them had seen when flying over the mountains while Eustace was still a dragon. It was a low green island inhabited by nothing but rabbits and a few goats, but from the ruins of stone huts and from blackened places where fires had been, they judged it had been peopled not long before. There were also some bones and broken weapons. Pirates' work, said Caspian. Or the dragon, said Edmund. The only other thing they found here was a little skin boat or coracle on the sands. It was made of hide stretched over a wicker framework. It was a tiny boat, barely 4 feet long, and the paddle, which still lay in it, was in proportion. They thought that either it had been made for a child, or else that the people of that country had been dwarfs. Reepicheep decided to keep it, as it was just the right size for him, so it was taken on board. They called that land Burnt Island and sailed away before noon. So just to reiterate what just happened, Reepicheep claimed a, what did they call it? Yeah, it's like a little boat, basically. They called it a coracle. So Reepicheep owns this coracle now because he claimed it. Okay. For some 5 days they ran before a southeast wind, out of sight of all lands, and seeing neither fish nor gull. Then they had a day that rained hard till the afternoon. Eustace lost 2 games of chess to Reepicheep, and began to get like his old and disagreeable self again, and Edmund said he wished they could have gone to America with Susan. Then Lucy looked out of the stern windows and said, "Hello, I do believe it's stopping. And what's that?" They all tumbled up to the poop at this and found that the rain had stopped, and that Drinian, who was on the watch, was also staring hard at something astern, or rather at several things. They looked a little like smooth rounded rocks, a whole line of them with intervals of about 40 feet in between. "But they can't be rocks," Drinian was saying, "because they weren't there 5 minutes ago." "And one's just disappeared," said Lucy. "Yes, and there's another one coming up," said Edmund. "And nearer," said Eustace. "Hang it," said Caspian, "the whole thing is moving this way." "And moving a great deal quicker than we can sail, sire. It'll be up with us in a minute." They all held their breath, for it is not at all nice to be pursued by an unknown something either on land or sea, but what it turned out to be was far worse than anyone had suspected. Suddenly, only about the length of a cricket pitch from the port side, an appalling head reared itself out of the sea. It was all greens and vermilions with purple blotches, except where shellfish clung to it, and shaped rather like a horse's, though without ears. It had enormous eyes made for staring through the dark depths of the ocean, and a gaping mouth filled with double rows of sharp fish-like teeth. It came up on what they first took to be a huge neck, but as more and more of it emerged, everyone knew that this was not its neck but its body, and that at last they were seeing what so many people have foolishly wanted to see, the great sea serpent. The folds of its gigantic tail could be seen far away, rising at intervals from the surface, and now its head was towering up higher than the mast. Every man rushed to his weapon, but there was nothing to be done. The monster was out of reach. "Shoot! Shoot!" cried the master bowman, and several obeyed, but the arrows glanced off the sea serpent's hide as if it was iron-plated. Then, for a dreadful minute, everyone was still, staring up at its eyes and mouth and wondering where it would pounce. But it didn't pounce. It shot its head forward across the ship on a level with the yard of the mast. Now its head was just beside the fighting top. Still it stretched and stretched till its head was over the starboard bulwark. Then down it began to come, not onto the crowded deck, but into the water, so that the whole ship was under an arch of serpent. And almost at once that arch began to get smaller. Indeed, on the starboard, the sea serpent was now almost touching the Dawn Treader's side. Eustace, who had really been trying very hard to behave well till the rain in the chest put him back, now did the first brave thing he had ever done. He was wearing a sword that Caspian had lent him. As soon as the serpent's body was near enough to the starboard side, he jumped on to the bulwark and began hacking at it with all his might. It was true that he accomplished nothing beyond breaking Caspian's second-best sword into bits, but it was a fine thing for a beginner to have done. Others would have joined him if At that moment Reepicheep had not called out, "Don't fight! Push!" It was so unusual for the mouse to advise anyone not to fight. Even in that terrible moment, every eye turned to him, and when he jumped up onto the bulwark forward of the snake and set his little furry back against his huge scaly slimy back and began pushing as hard as he could, quite a number of people saw what he meant and rushed to both sides of the ship to do the same. And when, a moment later, the sea serpent's head appeared again, this time on the port side and this time with its back to them, then everyone understood. The brute had made a loop of itself round the Dawn Treader and was beginning to draw the loop tight. When it got quite tight, snap! There would be floating matchwood where the ship had been, and it could pick them out of the water one by one. Their only chance was to push the loop backward till it slid over the stern, or else, to put the same thing another way, to push the ship forward out of the loop. Reepicheep alone had of course no more chance of doing this than of lifting up a cathedral, but he had nearly killed himself with trying before others shoved him aside. Very soon the whole ship's company, except Lucy and the mouse, which was fainting, was in two long lines along the two bulwarks, each man's chest to the back of the man in front, so that the weight of the whole line was in the last man, pushing for their lives. For a few sickening seconds, which seemed like hours, nothing appeared to happen. Joints cracked, sweat dropped, breath came in grunts and gasps. When they felt that the ship was moving, they felt the ship was moving. They saw that the snake loop was further from the mast than it had been, but they also saw that it was smaller, and now the real danger was at hand. Could they get it over the poop, or was it already too tight? Yes, it would just fit. It was resting on the poop rails. A dozen or more sprang up on the poop. This was far better. The sea serpent's body was so low now that they could make a line across the poop and push side by side. Hope rose high till everyone remembered the high carved stern, the dragon tail of the Dawn Treader. It would be quite impossible to get the brute over that. I just want to pause here and remind everybody that the poop is the back deck on top. It's the top deck in the back end of the ship. In the front end, they have the forecastle. In the back end, they have the poop. That's what the poop is. And no, because that's what's written in the story, and that's the correct word for it. Daniel thinks that it's really funny that it's called the poop. Well, okay. No, I'm going to call it the poop because that's what it's called. And it would be quite impossible to get the brute over that. An axe, cried Caspian hoarsely, and still shove. Lucy, who knew where everything was, heard him where she was standing on the main deck, staring up at the poop. In a few seconds she had been below, got the axe, and was rushing up the ladder to the poop. But just as she reached the top, there came a crashing noise like a tree coming down, and the ship rocked and darted forward. For at that very moment, whether because the sea serpent was being pushed so hard, or because it foolishly decided to draw the noose tight, the whole of the carved stern broke off, and the ship was free. The others were too exhausted to see what Lucy saw. There, a few yards behind them, the loop of the sea serpent's body got rapidly smaller and disappeared into a splash. Lucy always said, but of course she was very excited at the moment, and it may have been only imagination, that she saw a look of idiotic satisfaction on the creature's face. What is certain is that it was a very stupid animal, for instead of pursuing the ship, its head round and began nosing all along its own body as if it expected to find the wreckage of the Dawn Treader there. But the Dawn Treader was already well away, running before a fresh breeze, and the men lay and sat, panting and groaning all about the deck, till presently they were able to talk about it and then to laugh about it, and when some rum had been served out, they even raised a cheer, and everyone praised the valor of Eustace, though it hadn't done any good, and of Reepicheep. After this they sailed for 3 days more and saw nothing but sea and sky. On the 4th day the wind changed to the north and the seas began to rise. By the afternoon it had nearly become a gale, but at the same time they sighted land at their port bow. "By your leave, sir," said Drinian, "we will try to get under the lee of that country by rowing in Lion Harbour, maybe till this is over." Caspian agreed, but a long row against the gale did not bring them to the land before evening. By the last light of that day they steered into a natural harbour and anchored, but no one went ashore that night. In the morning they found themselves in the green bay of a rugged, lonely-looking country which sloped up to a rocky summit. From the windy north beyond that summit clouds came streaming rapidly. They lowered the boat and loaded her with any of the water casks which were now empty. "Which stream shall we water at, Drinian?" said Caspian as he took his seat in the stern sheets of the boat. "There seem to be two coming down into the bay." "It makes little odds, sire," said Drinian, "but I think it's a shorter pull to that on the starboard, the eastern one." "Here comes the rain," said Lucy. "I should think it does," said Edmund, for it was already pelting hard. "I say, let's go to the other stream. There are trees there, and we'll have some shelter." "Yes, let's," said Eustace. "No point in getting wetter than we need." But all the time Drinian was steadily steering to the starboard, like tiresome people in cars who continue at 40 miles an hour while you're explaining to them that they are on the wrong road, and what they really meant was going 100 miles an hour on the Autobahn. That's what C.S. Lewis really meant. But they didn't do that in Germany at that time. "They're right, Drinian," said Caspian. "Why don't you bring her head round and make western stream?" "As your majesty pleases," said Drinian a little shortly. He had had an anxious day with the weather yesterday, and he didn't like advice from landsmen, but he altered course, and it turned out afterward that it was a good thing he did. By the time they had finished watering, the rain was over, and Caspian, with Eustace, the Pevensies, and Reepicheep, decided to walk up to the top of the hill and see what could be seen. It was a stiffish climb through coarse grass and heather, and they saw neither man nor beast except seagulls. When they reached the top, they saw that it was a very small island, not more than 20 acres, and from this height the sea looked larger and more desolate than it did from the deck, or even the fighting top of the Don Treader. "Crazy, you know," said Eustace to Lucy in a low voice, looking at the eastern horizon. "Sailing on and on into that with no idea what we may get to." But he only said it out of habit and not really nastily, as he would have done at one time. It was too cold to stay long on the ridge, for the wind still blew freshly from the north. "Don't let's go back the same way," said Lucy as they turned. "Let's go along a bit and come down by the other stream, the one Drinian wanted to go to." Everyone agreed to this, and after about 15 minutes they were at the source of the second river. It was a more interesting place than they had expected, a deep little mountain lake surrounded by cliffs except for a narrow channel on the seaward side out of which the water flowed. Here at last they were out of the wind, and all sat down in the heather above the cliff for a rest. All sat down but one. It was Edmund, jumped up again very quickly. "They go in for sharp stones on this island," he said, groping about in heather. "Where is the wretched thing? Ah, now, I've got it. Hello! It wasn't a stone at all, it was a sword hilt. No, by Jove, it's a whole sword. What the rust is left of it. It must have lain here for ages." "Narnian, too, by the look of it," said Caspian, as they all crowded round. "I'm sitting on something too," said Lucy, "something hard." It turned out to be the remains of a male shirt. But by this time everyone was on hands and knees, feeling in the thick heather in every direction. Their search revealed one by one a helmet, a dagger, and a few coins, not Calormen crescents, but genuine Narnian lions, and trees such as you might see any day in the marketplace of Beaver's Dam or Baruna. "Looks as if this might be all that's left of one of our 7 lords," said Edmund. "Just what I was thinking," said Caspian. "I wonder which it was. There's nothing on the dagger to show, and I wonder how he died." "And how are we to avenge him?" added Reepicheep. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. "Look here," he said, "there's something very fishy about this. He can't have been killed in a fight." "Why not?" asked Caspian. "No bones," said Edmund, An enemy might take the armor and leave the body, but who ever heard of a chap who'd won a fight carrying away the body and leaving the armor? Perhaps he was killed by a wild animal, Lucy suggested. It'd be a clever animal, said Edmund, that would take a man's male shirt off. Perhaps a dragon, said Caspian. Nothing doing, said Eustace. A dragon couldn't do it. I ought to know. Well, let's get away from the place anyway, said Lucy. She had not felt like sitting down again since Edmund had raised the question of bones. If you like, said Caspian, getting up. I don't think any of this stuff is worth taking away. They came down round to the little opening where the stream came out of the lake, and stood looking at the deep water within the circle of cliffs. If it had been a hot day, no doubt some would have been tempted to bathe, and everyone would have had a drink. Indeed, even as it was, Eustace was on the very point of stooping down and scooping up some water in his hands when Reepicheep and Lucy, both at the same moment, cried, "Look!" So he forgot about his drink and looked into the water. The bottom of the pool was made of large grayish-blue stones, and the water was perfectly clear. And on the bottom lay a life-size figure of a man, made apparently of gold. It lay face downward, with its arms stretched out above its head, and it had so happened that as they looked at it, the clouds parted, and the sun shone out. The golden shape was lit up from end to end. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful statue she had ever seen. "Well," whistled Caspian, "that was worth coming to see. I wonder, can we get it out?" "We can dive for it, sire," said Reepicheep. "No good at all," said Edmund. "At least if it's really gold, solid gold, it'll be far too heavy to bring up. And that pool's 12 or 15 if it's an inch. Half a moment, though. It's a good thing I brought a hunting spear with me. Let's see what the depth is like. Hold on to my hand, Caspian, while I lean out over the water a bit." Caspian took his hand, and Edmund, leaning forward, began to lower his spear into the water. Before it was halfway in, Lucy said, "I don't believe the statue is gold at all. It's only the light. Your spear looks just the same color." "What's wrong?" asked several voices at once. For Edmund had suddenly let go of the spear. "I couldn't hold it," gasped Edmund. "It seemed so heavy." "And there it is on the bottom now," said Caspian, "and Lucy is right. It looks just the same color as the statue." But Edmund, who appeared to be having some trouble with his boots, at least he was bending down and looking at them, straightened himself all at once and shouted out in a sharp voice which people hardly ever disobey, "Get back! Back from the water, all of you, at once!" They all did, and stared at him. "Look," said Edmund, "look at the toes of my boots." "They look a bit yellow," began Eustace. "They're gold, solid gold," interrupted Edmund. "Look at them, feel them. The leather's pulled away from it already, and they're as heavy as lead." "By Aslan," said Caspian, "you don't mean to say—" "Yes, I do," said Edmund. "That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it's got so heavy. And it was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot, and it turned the toe caps into gold. And that poor fellow on the bottom, well, you see." "So it isn't a statue at all," said Lucy in a low voice. "No. The whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed on top of the cliff while where we were sitting. The clothes have rotted away or been taken by birds to line nests with. The armor's still there. Then he dived and—" "Don't," said Lucy. "What a horrible thing!" "And what a narrow shave we've had," said Edmund. "Narrow indeed," said Reepicheep. "Anyone's finger, anyone's foot, anyone's whisker, or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water at any moment." "All the same," said Caspian, "we may as well test it." He stooped down and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then very cautiously he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather dipped it. What he drew out was a perfect model of heather made of the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. "The king who owned this island," said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, "would soon be the richest of all kings in the world. I claim this land forever as a Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind all of you to secrecy. No one must know of this, not even Drinian, on pain of death. Do you hear?" "Who are you talking to?" said Edmund. I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way around. I am one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you are under allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it? Said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Oh! Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw what she had seen. Across the grey hillside above them, grey, for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise, and without looking at them, and shining as if he were in a bright sunlight through, though the sun had in fact gone in, passed with slow pace the hugest lion that human eyes had ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterward, he was the size of an elephant. Remember, he was bigger in the last book than he was in the first book. Though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse, but it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan. And nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep. What were we talking about? Said Caspian. Have I been making have I been making stupidity of myself? Sire, said Reepicheep, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once. And if I might have the honor of naming this island, I should call it Deathwater. That strikes me as a very good name, Reep, said Caspian, though now I come to think of it, I don't know why. But the weather seems to be settling, and I dare say Drinian would like to be off. What a lot we shall have to tell him. But in fact they had not much to tell, for the memory of the last hour had all become confused. Their Majesties all seemed a bit bewitched when they came aboard, said Drinian to Rince some hours later, when the Dawn Treader was once more under sail and Deathwater Island already below the horizon. Something happened to them in that place. The only thing I could get clear was that they think they found the body of one of those lords they're looking for. You don't say so, Captain, answered Rince. Well, that's 3, only 4 more. At this rate, we might be home soon after the new year. And a good thing, too, my baki's running a bit low. Good night, sir. Chapter 9 is called The Island of the Voices. And the first word is and that is where we will stop for the evening. And we are going to read that and the following chapter in the next evening, tomorrow, assuming that I have any consciousness after my overnight shift that I have. Here is Kimberly's picture. I think this might be Eustace. I'm not sure. Is this Eustace? So there's Kimmy's picture for today. Oh, what? Oh, there's an armband. That's Eustace.
No,
It has to be Eustace. He's got an armband. Here's Daniel's picture. Really nice sword. Wow. And a good tank there.
The KV2. The KV2.
The KV2.
No, it's the KV2.
And what do you got for us, JJ? JJ's going to show us what he's got. Here we go. Some daggers, it looks like. Really nice. Really nice. If you've got some pictures, then go ahead and take a picture of it and send it in the comments. Or you can email it to me at heavyd23@gmail.com, or Facebook it to me. Any of those will do. But just put it in the comments and then we can all see it. And that'd be great. So I just want to say good night to everybody. God bless you. Happy Resurrection Day. And we will see you again tomorrow for more of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader.